Welcome to the June 21st meeting of the East Hampton Town Board. Carol, would you please read the roll call?
Present.
Present.
Here. Present.
Present. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Today's agenda will begin with the public portion where any member of the public may address the board on any topic. We ask that you please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And we will discuss the following topics. We'll discuss an amendment to the Chapter 255, 1188, outdoor dining, addition of outdoor seating, amendment of Chapter 255, 184, lighting to allow town code compliant string lights, and rescission of Chapter 200, downtown Montauk outdoor right-of-way dining pilot program, personal wireless services facilities, town code amendment, and CPF water quality, groundwater nitrogen inputs to Hog Creek, Cornell Cooperative Extension, followed by liaison reports, and we do have some resolutions to offer today. There are no members of the public here present in person today to speak. Jason, do we have any callers on the line?
So far, we have no callers on the line.
Okay, I do want to change the order in which the topics will be discussed today. We will start with the CPF water quality, groundwater nitrogen inputs to Hog Creek. And I believe we have Melissa Winslow here.
I'm waiting for them to come over. So.
Okay, so we're waiting on the Cornell Cooperative folks who are not here yet. Okay, in that case, we'll go with our regularly scheduled program. We have Jeremy Samuelson here, our Director of Planning, to discuss chapter amendments.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Thank you for taking this up. A couple of items for you this morning. The first one, and we actually have PowerPoint. Hadn't anticipated offering you any slides, but just sort of the way it all shook out, it was like, well, there's slides already, so I might as well share them. I'm just going to use them as notes. In essence, we're trying to get the code where we need it to be in terms of string lighting on the one hand, and then also for outdoor dining on the other hand. So I'll start with the string lighting, if I may, please. Basically, and actually that's going to be, if you could scroll in a couple of slides till it says lighting at the top. Thank you so much. All right. So really, when the town board decided to update its list of the types of lighting that were not permitted in East Hampton town, the readily available type of string lighting, what folks consider string lighting, it's sort of the cord, a bulb, the bulb, sort of hanging out over somebody's back patio or something. They didn't really make, and they weren't readily available in anything that was dark skies compliant or fully shielded. And now the market has caught up. And if you are actually wanting to be able to use some form of string lighting outside for a commercial establishment, for example, in an approved area where you have a permit and we've reviewed it, there are types of string lighting that would be appropriate for use in a setting like that. So as I just said, you would still have to get a permit. You would still have to do all of those pieces. But we no longer, I would argue, need to strictly prohibit the use of string lighting per se, as there are now code compliant options. So the provision that is before you today would first strike the outright prohibition against string lighting as a named item. And then what it would require is that anybody who wanted to apply for an administrative lighting permit for lighting at a commercial establishment would have the opportunity, just as they do now, to come to the planning department, sit with us, talk it through, show us what you'd like to do. We'll pull the paperwork on your property, and then we can figure out if the specific type of fixture that you are proposing to use is actually dark skies compliant. And that's really where we're going here. The market has caught up. It now offers dark sky compliant string lighting. We now, at the request of many of the businesses around town that want to follow the rules and want to be dark skies compliant, we want to now make sure that that's an option that we can offer and not be contradicting the code as it's written. So that's really the basics of this whole thing. Just to put a finer point on the dark skies piece of this, the three things that I ask people, whether you're a private homeowner or whether you're coming to us from the commercial side, the three things that I ask you to keep in mind when you're just asking that big picture question, is this roughly the right kind of lighting? The bulb needs to be shielded. And oftentimes what that means is not that there's just some nice little like tinfoil hat on top of the thing, but that the bulb is actually up inside the fixture so that when you're standing near the fixture, your light isn't seeing, or your eye rather, isn't actually picking up the source of the light. If you can see the filament or the equivalent of that in an LED, the diode, if you can actually make eye contact with that when you're standing off to the side, then that's not a fully shielded fixture. The bulb literally needs to be up in there a ways so that you've got a cover around it.
Right.
The second,
if I could just interject, we use the phrase light trespass.
Exactly.
And so the idea here is that the light be confined to the location at which it's installed and is not visible across property lines. So that's kind of just the basic tenet of the lighting law.
100%. So I always give people three quick things, answer these three quick questions and you'll know if you're even on the path to dark skies. And the first one is, can you see that, where the light is produced, the bulb itself? The second thing is, if you're standing at a maximum on the property boundary, does the light actually trip over that line? And to your point, Mr. Supervisor, light trespass. If it's tripping over that line, this is a no-go situation. The third thing is the color temperature. And all you really need to know on that, because it can get confusing in a hurry, is 3000 Kelvin or below. Just stick to those numbers, stick to those three things, and then come in and talk to us. We'll guide you from there, and hopefully you're off to the races. So I'm happy to pause on that piece of it. If there's any questions, the last part that I would throw in for you is that we're starting to see around town, and we have our counterparts here from code enforcement, and I'm sure they're happy to give us the report from the field. But we're starting to see some of this rope lighting, which I'm a little bit at a loss for how to explain it, but you've all seen this. Sometimes it's actually got a sticky back on it, and it sort of unwinds, and you can like adhere it or staple it to a wall or something. It's what you would use to outline the peak of a building or the doorway or something. Completely unshielded. Unless you're up under a railing or under a stair or something, using it as strictly downlight, where again, you can't see the source of light and you're not getting light trespass. Unless you're using it in that capacity, this is not compliant lighting. So I just wanted to bring that up because in our conversations about what amendments do we now need to periodically make to the code, several people have flagged the use of these rope lights. So I'm going to pause right there and see where you all want to take the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. The rope lighting sort of falls into the same category as the string lighting in that it can be used in a way that is code compliant. So I think what we are looking to do is to remove the prohibitions that of the specific type of lighting and categorize them all in one because there are examples of, for instance, underneath benches or valances or whatnot, where rope lighting is appropriate, could be used and does not violate the code. So, I think the bottom line is here, as long as the installation is within dark skies compliant, then we're happy to have it installed. Any other comments?
Yes, I have just one question. Does this also follow the non-essential landscaping lighting where there's a shut-off time? It's not a dusk to dawn lighting on any structure. So I know our landscape lighting is meant to be turned off at midnight.
100% correct. And I was actually going to bring this up in the next section because that's the code where we actually take this up. But you are, Councilwoman, 100% correct. So what we are simultaneously proposing, in addition to these definition changes, would be that all lighting at these commercial establishments, that's the outdoor lighting that's approved through an administrative permit, would be shut off no later than midnight. And the rationale there is that restaurants are allowed to serve until 11. and they need a little time to back out, clean up, get things sorted. And, but you still have to have a hard stop on the back end of it. So we said, okay, an hour should be sufficient there. At that point, it all needs to.
And we're talking about outdoors. Outdoor dining is till midnight.
Correct.
Till 11.
Till 11.
11. I mean, I just wanted to make that.
Correct.
So just, that was my question also.
Okay.
Then too, about, at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, I think that's appropriate, safe for the individuals that are working there. A couple conversations I had this weekend were, what about individuals that have to smoke outside, keep string lighting up for them? I'm not in agreement to allow for any longer than midnight. I think midnight is appropriate and reasonable right now within these provisions of the code. And if there's individuals that, have to smoke outside, they would have to go within what the current lighting plan is for the establishment also. But that was one of the questions that no business owner brought to me. I don't know if anyone has any.
And it makes sense from a special events permit. We typically don't have events go past 11, sometimes in remote areas to 12, but it makes sense to 11 o'clock if their outdoor dining is over, the event is over. As we said, midnight gives folks time to pack up the band or pack up clear the tables and get set for the next day.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Jeremy. We're going to have you back up in just a moment.
There's more to
Okay.
this permit, no?
Well, so I'm happy to talk about outdoor dining whenever you're ready.
I'd like to go back to Cornell Cooperative because I know they have
Perfect.
another presentation to make up island, and we know how the traffic can be. So this topic, we're going to be discussing groundwater nitrogen inputs to Hog Creek.
Morning, Town Board.
Morning.
So I'm Melissa Winslow. I'm a senior environmental analyst in the town's natural resources department. I have here today Molly Graffam and Ron Paulson from Cornell Cooperative Extension. Molly has her PhD from Stony Brook University and studied permeable reactive barriers for her thesis. And Ron is an experienced hydrogeologist, worked with the health department for a long time and is now with Cornell, and he has his professional geologist certification. So they're here today to discuss the results of the phase 1 investigation to identify and quantify groundwater nitrogen inputs to Hog Creek. This project kicked off in 2019 with Cornell and was funded through Community Preservation Fund Water Quality Improvement Program. The purpose of this program is to implement initiatives to effectively improve water quality and reduce pollutant loading to our water bodies with measurable results. Hog Creek is a priority water body in East Hampton, and it's a priority for remediation as it experiences stresses due to excessive nutrient and pathogen inputs, and can lead to some areas being seasonally and permanently closed to shellfishing by the DEC. Based on the Suffolk County Subwatersheds wastewater plan, Hog Creek has a nitrogen reduction goal of 78% for overall water quality improvement. According to the plan, 49% nitrogen reduction can be achievable through on-site wastewater management in the watershed. So while upgrading residential septic systems can get us most of the way there, we're going to need to couple that with some other initiatives to get us to that 78% goal. So this investigation completed by the team at Cornell is our first step towards reaching this goal. This work helps direct our remediation efforts to where we can have the biggest impact on water quality improvement by reducing nitrogen inputs to the creek. So I'm going to hand it over to Ron and Molly to get through their presentation and go over their results and recommendations.
Thank you, Melissa. Welcome, Molly and Paul. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having us today.
Thank you. Let Molly kick off and then weave in on some
Okay.
technical data collecting.
Thank you. We're going to go over some background terminology and some of the methods we use for our study, some results, and then some next steps to improve water quality at Hog Creek. Some of the terminology that we hope you are familiar with at the end of our presentation today, we are primarily talking about submarine groundwater discharge today. And this is water that's inland, moving mostly horizontally towards the water body and percolates up into the surface water. And submarine groundwater discharge has been identified as a major source of nitrogen to surface waters. And we also use the term pore water. Pore water is the water that's within the sediment bottom. And surface water nitrogen pollution is directly related to the nitrogen inputs that are coming through submarine groundwater discharge. So we want to give you an idea of how our work fits into the global or the larger picture of work that's been done in the town and in the county. And so our work is really focused on taking direct measurements and also ground truthing some model predictions. And we have been focusing on this nitrogen remediation siting strategy. So we can use information from the Suffolk County Subwatershed Plan, and the image that is shown here is from the modeled data from this subwatershed plan. And we use this information, and this will help us target our first stations to look at. And so we can use this data, but then we go ahead and take direct measurements to find out exactly where submarine groundwater discharge and high nitrogen loading is happening. And this is really important because shoreline sediments are not uniform. There's a lot of variability, and models can't take into account all environmental variables. So our work is really directed at finding these high rates of groundwater discharge and specific areas that are nutrient rich. And the nitrogen loading can vary widely over space and time. So we're trying to target and rank areas according to nitrogen loading conditions. So our method involves finding these areas within impaired water bodies such as Hog Creek, and then taking direct measurements, identifying areas that can be prioritized for remediation. And this work complements and builds upon model outputs that have been generated, and we're kind of taking the next step beyond what the models have output. Ron's going to take over to describe some of our methods.
Welcome, Ron. I apologize for calling you Paul, I think, when I introduced you.
Yeah, no problem. It's good to be here and see you all, and
See you again.
things are going well. So, I've spent a lot of time on Long Island water resources doing various investigations, but one of my big passions is to look at these groundwater discharge areas and to understand them, because that's where these contaminants get to our surface waters, whether it's nitrogen or some other contaminant or PFAS or something of that nature. So we've, over the last 20 years, specialized in developing techniques and equipment that I've been part of that development, and we've used them all over the country. Actually, I've been to probably some of the major Superfund sites in the US to look at this discharge, because all these plumes and things eventually wind up in the surface water. So our technique really involves the one instrument you see at the shoreline there is it's been coined the Trident Probe, but all it is really is a probe that's inserted in the first 2 feet of the sediment bottom offshore. And what it does is we use temperature and conductance to determine where the fresh water is, because fresh water is typically in the summer, it's much cooler than the surface water, and the salinity of it is zero, really, where the surface water salinity can be quite high. So if you take advantage of mapping that near the shore, you can quickly identify where these groundwater discharge seeps are. And then we also have a probe on there that can collect the sample at the same time. So we get the chemistry, we get the physical conditions, and you put all that together and you start to acquire an understanding of where the groundwater discharge is in Hog Creek or any embayment, because it's focused. And the models take us so far, but they don't take into account all the variability at the shoreline. There's sediment types, there's wetlands, there's not wetlands. There's very focused areas where a good majority of the nitrogen's coming in. So to identify those, you can target where you want to stress or put your remediation to have the greatest impact. Can't do it everywhere. So we got to go after, we call it a triage, really, because, even though we could stop in time with alternate septics and such, the septic input, there's a legacy nitrogen that's in our aquifer going to be there for decades. So we have to do something near shore in the immediate future. And that's kind of where my work and Molly's work with her PhD to develop these things. So that's kind of completes the background. So the other important piece of equipment that we use is what we call a seepage meter. And what it is a funnel that gets placed in the bottom. Once we identify where the groundwater is coming through, we need to know how fast and the rate of it. And this uses an ultrasonic system. The funnel goes in the bottom and it collects the very slow flow that comes through those sediments, and it can measure that. So now we have what's in that water at a rate, and we can determine how many pounds per foot of or area of shoreline are coming in and rate those. So those are the two main pieces of equipment that we brought to the table at Cornell. So we've used this over a large area. It's one of the first embayment-wide projects we did on a large scale. We did, I think, about 100 pore water collections. We have about 10 or 15 transects that went right across Hog Creek. And then we divided Hog Creek up into 6 areas so that we could rate them and see where the areas of most impact from groundwater are. And so that was what we did in 2019 and 20. Okay. Along with that, we also collected sediment samples and to determine not only where these muck layers are, because those are important to know, sometimes 5 feet thick parts of the creek. And sometimes near the shore, there's none, and it's very advective. It's sandy, gravelly. I'm sure you've been in the shallow water and you feel it's cold here. Well, that's the groundwater. And normally you'll find out where the coarser sediments are. And so it's good to know those features about. And so while we were out there, we did a sediment mapping of what the bottom sediments were composed of. So the pore water nitrogen, overall it ranged, about 2.3, I think that's milligrams per liter coming through, but that range could be as high as over 10 or as low as some areas, very little in more of the pristine areas. So we prepared a map that helped identify where the hot spots were. And basically the entrance in what we call the headwaters, the northeast branch, all the way up in the upper right, and the southern area were really focal points for a lot of that nitrogen. And they had strong rates of discharge to go with it. So. And again, we used, these are maps showing what the conductance was in those fluids. And again, that helped to verify that the water we were collecting was indeed groundwater discharge and not just water that's, always present in the pore fluids, but it's more marine, or it could be related to the organic matter that's there. But this mapping, weeds out those natural fluxes and focuses on the groundwater discharge area. So the one thing that was rather alarming, we're still out there occasionally collecting some samples, and the one area that we noticed in the mid reaches there had just tremendous macroalgae, mostly ulva. And this year, there's a subspecies of ulva that's kind of grass-like, filamentous. And back years ago, we called it enteromorpha. And now I understand they've categorized it as a species related to ulva. So they're kind of commingled. And what we found is where that filamentaceous algae is, almost 100% of the time there was high nitrogen inputs. So there's a direct cause and effect. And nature's telling us that these are areas that we need to focus on. Okay. And I think you pick it up.
So the two pieces of information that Ron spoke about, the pore water nitrogen concentration and the seepage rates, those two pieces of information are really useful because that gives us what we can then determine to be the nitrogen loading factor. So the concentration and the flow rate can be combined to give us the nitrogen loading factor. And then we used that information and prioritized and ranked certain areas. The photo that I'm showing here is a picture of the seepage meter in the water in the entrance region, which is where we found some of the highest seepage and highest nitrogen rates. So this is a table that's one of the final tables in the report, but it shows that in some of these areas, hundreds of pounds of nitrogen can be entering in a shoreline area over 100 feet long by 10 feet wide area. So we made our direct measurements, and then we made some assumptions using the sediment type information and the water quality information nearby. So we assumed a certain area of a seepage zone, and then we're able to calculate our nitrogen loading factor and found that these areas are indeed introducing hundreds of pounds of nitrogen per day. And these are going to be the areas that we can focus on for remediation. So I wanted to cover some of this strategy that we've used has been really successful for remediation in other areas. And East Hampton has been a leading town, and we've been working with the Natural Resources Department and really installing remediations based on this information that we collect. So in some of the areas, they include Pussy's Pond, Accabonac Harbor, Tanbark Creek, and Georgia Pond. Those are the main areas in East Hampton that we've been focusing on that have really been great areas where there will be either permeable reactive barriers or other nitrogen remediation strategies based on some of our results. And at Hog Creek, we recognize that there's not a one-size-fits-all solution to cure every water body. Like Ron mentioned earlier, there's going to be, changes that have to happen over decades as far as the septic improvements. And we would like to suggest that other treatments that can be done more immediately to help improve water quality, such as PRBs or nutrient bioextraction, should also be considered. And so our recommendations are to do site characterization at some of the major areas where we've found these high nitrogen loading conditions so that permeable reactive barriers or nutrient bioextraction can occur in these areas. So for future steps, we've identified the 5 major areas where we'd like to perform site characterization and do installation of remediation there. And we've been working with the town and with the different housing associations in that area. And we've got collaborators who are interested in working with us to help these remediations move forward. So some of them are private property, and the citizens there, we've communicated with them and they're very interested in moving forward with this. And some of it is town-owned property where we can work with the town to get that installed. So we will be moving forward with this multi-phase approach, and we'll be applying for CPF funds this summer to move forward with remediation. So we will take any questions, and thank you so much for your time.
Questions for Molly or Ron?
I enjoy the science that you're bringing to this, Ron.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. When this project came, don't forget we went through COVID. So there's a lot of stuff that the board has approved that we haven't seen the results of in a couple of years then too. So you're reminding us of these CPF projects that we're actually going to see what are the results of them now, or even more here, before we even implement an action plan, what's happening there. And that's what I think you did. You laid the groundwork, to find where the groundwater or the pore water is coming from then too. So very interesting concepts that you brought. I appreciate it. I know there's silting issues that are up there. poor septic systems up there. So it's a lot, but now we have some manageable numbers that we can calculate and have a baseline too. I think that helps all our projects, and it keeps the residents, because it's the taxpayer money right now. It keeps them engaged that, we're not just throwing it all around there. We are going to follow the science, and this is one of the first layers that we have of it. So I appreciate you bringing that, and I appreciate Melissa for bringing it too.
I was just curious if in your research you're finding any anomalies, or are you seeing things pretty much consistent with what one would expect from the subwatershed plan that was developed in terms of travel times and loading?
Those couple.
I mean, I know like the head of the creek, one would just naturally expect would get the greatest amount of inputs perhaps, and other topographical, kind of areas would lead to more inputs potentially. But like you said, there's so many different factors until you start understanding what the composition of the ground itself and whether or not it's permeable and whatnot, that all impacts it.
Yeah, you're right. The watershed model gets you so far, and that's what we found. We've had projects in other areas where we use the watershed model to target PRB installations. And actually one was in East Hampton. We were going to go by Gann Road on 3 Mile Harbor. The model said we should find all this nitrogen. Well, because of the hydrogeology, the type of nitrogen that was present, we moved that project to Tanbark Creek. So the model, gets you so far, but a lot of things happen in that last 100 feet of shoreline. And there's something called the hypereric zone, the last 2 feet before it discharges. Because this process that we're talking about, the PRB, is a natural process. And there are sediments capable of doing that naturally. So not everywhere is important. So the anomalies we find really are focusing where this groundwater is just burning through untreated.
Right.
And that's really, well, the modeling has been great and helpful, but you need to dig into, where you can focus it and put your money to focus on those areas.
Sure. So you're seeing some areas that where the travel times might be less than what the subwatershed map might indicate, and where you're getting much larger inputs that are focused in a particular area.
Inputs over the last 2 years, we've noticed the results jumped up. The nitrogen values, even Hog Creek, well, this macro.
And because of the year-round habitation of those homes around the creek during COVID, right?
The 2-year capture area.
And we've been a seasonal community for so long, and now we're becoming more of a year-round community. So that's not, that I guess isn't too much of a surprise, really. But,
yeah.
Which makes the importance of dealing with the problem, much greater.
I mean, we're hopeful because we think some of these strategies, the bioextraction and the PRBs, can provide some type of relief. It's a triage, and
Right.
It can be done. We're getting better and better at installing them and figuring out easier ways to put in these barriers. There's injections of carbon, and drilling in carbon, and trenching, so that where the science, and Molly did a lot of this for a PhD, is catching up to the need, because it has to be cost effective, and you have to be able to put it in areas without ripping someone's backyard apart.
Right.
Getting closer and closer to that. So I don't think what we're proposing is some pie in the sky thing. It's
Sure.
very doable, and more doable with all the research and efforts that support. We work with Stony Brook, also as a.
Right. So we have to approach and attack the problem 3 different ways. We have to reduce or eliminate the inputs. Then we have to deal with the legacy inputs that are already in the ground traveling towards our surface waters. And then we also can approach it by restoring the ability of the water bodies themselves to deal with nitrogen in a healthy way, like you said, by having kelp or other subaquatic vegetation that takes up nitrogen, shellfish, which filter nitrogen out, oysters, clams.
One thing I'd
Restore the
mention
bio.
is that the PRBs and nutrient bioextraction, they're going to be removing nitrogen regardless of the source. So although septic is a major source, there's also atmospheric and fertilizers that are also contributing, and the relative distribution of that depends on the land use. So these techniques that we're proposing, they address all sources. They have to be in a certain form of nitrogen, but it's not just one source that we would be targeting. So it's a really effective way to treat nitrogen at the shoreline.
Right. Yeah, I think that's one of the surprising things about atmospheric nitrogen deposition is it could be as high as 40% of the total nitrogen loading in a water body. So, well, it's a pleasure to have you both here.
you.
Do you see any eelgrass out there?
Hog Creek, I didn't really see any impress.
Oof.
You know, I think there's, what we're proposing, I think there's a ray of hope. Because I hate giving these things and just talking about all, we all know the negatives. And this whole effort is built on doing something positive about it. Appreciate the support of the community. And,
Well, we
Thank you.
appreciate your
Yes.
work and
Yeah,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much for bringing us up to date.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well. So we'll jump back to our discussion of amending the zoning code. We are, I think, are now up to the outdoor dining portion of outdoor seating. We talked a little bit about lights. All right.
All right.
Welcome back, Jeremy.
Well, thank you. It's been a while.
Thank you for taking a brief hiatus while we heard from Cornell Cooperative. I know they have another presentation to make up island, so.
I always enjoy listening to smart people talk about their work. All right. Okay, so diving back in on outdoor dining and takeout. As you will recall, you all received a draft piece of legislation earlier this spring dealing with outdoor dining at restaurants. That came to you from the business committee and the planning department, and you all worked it a little and then adopted it as law. And the assumption throughout that entire conversation and process was that we were really trying to address the needs of restaurants per se as defined in the town code. And, you know, this was all coming out the back end of COVID. As you know, there were, under the emergency declaration, opportunities for restaurants to have seating outside, made all the sense in the world. Those weren't supported by our code. And so you all asked us to, you know, go figure out how to make this happen. And we did it, and you adopted a piece of legislation. Left out from that legislation, and I think quite on purpose because the need wasn't apparent at the time, was a decision about whether or not to include takeout food establishments or delis. And so the distinction here really comes to us from Suffolk County. And you all know much of this, but I'll just sort of share it, you know, for everybody who's following along. Suffolk County, it draws a distinction between a takeout kind of joint where you walk up, you get some tacos, you know, take them to a table and you sit down. There is no table service, right? Or a deli. You go, you get a sandwich, maybe you take it with you on the road, or you eat it at a, you know, a stool in the corner, or, you know, again, at a table outside. Those are takeout type uses, deli kind of uses, and those are different from the restaurant uses. And the reason that matters here is the law that the town adopted earlier in the year was looking exclusively at how do we provide outdoor dining opportunities for restaurants. The key factor for which here is table service. Somebody comes up, they take your order, they bring you your food, you pay the check at the end. That's a different experience, as we all know, than the takeout. Suffolk County tells us that under takeout, an establishment can have, as of right, up to 16 seats, and those can be either indoors or outdoors. And the county doesn't really get too involved in, trying to figure out beyond that, because it feels, I think, in their eyes, like a light enough touch. It's a small enough footprint here that it's a manageable number of seats, and, it's different than a restaurant. And so all of the extenuating things that make a restaurant more complicated, many of those go away here. And we're able to have this category in parallel of takeout or deli type use. So going back several years ago, I think, as all of you know, East Hampton Town wanted to have our code actually support what the county allows for 16 seats. So there was a piece of legislation that was put forward as a pilot program. It was called Chapter 200, the Downtown Montauk Outdoor Right-of-Way Dining Pilot Program. Say that 3 times. So the point was, a lot of businesses that weren't restaurants, but were these delis and whatnot, had come forward and said, can I put a table out front? How are we going to make this work? And as you all know, in a lot of areas of Montauk, downtown Montauk in particular, because we have such wide right-of-ways, and you have these complicated ownership structures, the state right-of-way or town-owned right-of-way, or the fire lanes out the back of the buildings from when the village was laid out, or the hamlet was laid out going back 100 years ago. There's all of these right-of-ways that really box people in, and people said, well, can I put my table right there? And so the town board acted several years ago, acknowledging that the county has this 16-seat provision for takeout restaurants, and the town created this pilot program. Well, there was disagreement about whether or not this pilot program had officially sunsetted or was done or not. So the easiest thing to do when we recently got feedback about the legislation saying outdoor dining is allowed, the feedback we got was, we really need to figure out how to take whatever allowances we want to create for the deli and takeout places. And can we just make this one section of code? So, we've got this old piece of code, this Chapter 200, that was very specific to Montauk and right-of-ways. And everybody knew it was a pilot program. It's right there in the name, even though we didn't have a sunset date on it. And what we began to figure out when we were trying to figure out how to solve this problem is the old Chapter 200 that I just read you the long title of. It's complicated. It's more onerous than it needs to be. We're looking for straightforward answers here that members of the public can digest readily. So the proposal that came forward, and what you're being asked to consider today, is take the old Chapter 200. Set it aside. Let's remove it from the code, and let's take a look at the piece of legislation that you all adopted earlier this year for outdoor dining at restaurants, and let's figure out how to put takeout dining into there. So again, consolidate code, get rid of old stuff that isn't working, and take this new piece of code that you all have adopted, 255.1188, and add in this takeout section. What this would effectively do, if you're a proprietor of one of these establishments and you say, how does this affect me? The short answer is, if you want to keep seats on your 16 seats that you're allowed as the max, and that's important to reinforce that that's the max here under this takeout and deli type arrangement. The way this will impact you is, if you want to keep those seats on your property, inside the building, outside the building, doesn't matter. As long as they're on your property and it's done in a sensible way. You didn't steal some parking, you didn't jam up fire access, you made common sense decisions here. You don't need a permit. So if you want to take those 16 seats or some portion thereof, and you want to use one of these right-of-ways that's next to your property, because in a lot of cases, folks, as we said before, are hemmed in by these. If you want to use one of those, well, now we think you need to come to us for a permit. And the reason for that is really about making sure that things are laid out properly on the property that the town owns, and that we have an insurance liability certificate that can accompany that. So without making this any harder than it needs to be, if you've got 16 seats and you're on your property, you're operating within, your C of O says you're a deli or you're a takeout, or your site plan approves you as one of those two kinds of uses, and you've got a max of 16 seats and they're in sensible locations on your property, continue as you are, right? If you want to use adjoining property, whether that be a right-of-way or private property, then you would then be subject to this new piece of legislation here, or this updated legislation, and you would now need to come to the planning department and request a permit. So here's a decision that you all will be asked to have an opinion about as you consider this. And so if we go to the broader outdoor dining slide, there's a couple of questions here. You see where it says determine eligibility for. So these are really questions that you all are going to need to guide the conversation on. There is, of course, a distinction between a right-of-way that may be municipally owned. It may be owned by New York State, could be owned by Suffolk County, right? So that set that as one category here. I already said somebody would need to come to us and apply for a permit. Where you all need to offer guidance here and probably have some debate amongst yourselves is, what if somebody is proposing to use their neighbor's property with permission, obviously? So we see this in the outdoor dining law that you all passed a couple months ago, where if there's a restaurant and they have permission from their neighbor to put some of the tables next door on their neighbor's property, and the planning department has reviewed it and everybody thinks it's fine the way it's laid out, that's actually allowed for restaurants. But you all are now being asked to take a look at the takeout portion of this code that's being proposed here and ask yourselves the question, do we have the same answer for a establishment that's proposing to use space outside on a neighboring property that's a right-of-way as we would? Do we have the same answer for that as we would for private property next door? So I tee that up.
That's
for
a
you
right-of-way or not a right-of-way?
That's the next door private property.
Correct.
Private
Thank you.
property.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's a question that you all will need to help us land on. Two other questions here is, in the broader piece of legislation that you all adopted earlier this year that we're now back to amend and think about, we were pretty clear that residential zones, even if you had a restaurant, if you're in a residential zone, the potential to impact your neighbors goes up. Right. And so we wanted to make sure that there were sort of some guide rails in there that said, how do we make sure that everybody is being a good neighbor here? And so one of the things that we did was we said, if you are residentially zoned, this is actually not an allowance. You cannot come in and get this permit approval from the planning department, with some exceptions. And the exceptions here were if you were in a limited business overlay. So the way the code is actually adopted by you all, limited business overlay is actually included in there. And I would argue that that is a drafting mistake based on the conversation that the business committee had and the drafts that went around. And I think we all see drafting errors all the time. Other folks may say, no, actually, we quite intentionally put that in. I was in all the meetings. I would say that this one was hashed out pretty thoroughly, and the limited business overlay was meant to come out from the final draft before it landed before you all. It did not. So in the law, as it is adopted, actually limited business overlay is included in there. The net effect of this is that is a residentially zoned property, as you know, and then it has this limited business overlay that's applied on top of that allows these establishments, even though they're pre-existing non-conforming, to go ahead and operate as a restaurant as they've done historically. So you all know that one of the principal tenets here that you're asked to use when you think about adjusting code and how it applies to pre-existing non-conforming is, are we allowing the expansion of a pre-existing non-conforming use? And so without steering the conversation too hard one way or the other, I would ask you to focus on the questions that are at the bottom of this page where it says determine eligibility for. I think those are really the sort of friction points within the code as it stands now. So if I zoom out a little bit, you have what I think is an excellent piece of legislation that a lot of people worked really hard on for outdoor dining at restaurants. The question was brought up about how do we handle takeout and delis. We've made a series of recommendations for you for how we think those can be best handled. If we include it in the code, we can do it in a way that doesn't create a new permit burden for a whole class of people, but rather only requires permits for folks who want to use adjoining property. You all have the question to unpack about the distinction between right-of-way and neighboring, and then the residential portion. The last two pieces that I will point out to you here, a little further up on that same slide, there was some confusion in the original piece of legislation about how this handled tents. And the intent here, forgive the bad turn of phrase, was to be hands off on tents. In other words, when the business committee was talking about, what should be the nexus between anyone who wants to apply for a tent and anyone who wants to apply for outdoor dining, the answer was, in our minds at least, that outdoor dining application doesn't change a darn thing about tent rules or applications. Tents have a section of code. We didn't want to affect that, adjust it, amend it. We simply wanted to solve the outdoor dining problem over here. Our colleagues in the building department came to us and from code enforcement and fire marshal and said, could we offer a clarification in this amended piece of legislation that basically makes very clear exactly what I said before? This new piece of legislation for outdoor dining has an approximately 0% impact on any change to how tents can or should be handled by the departments that are currently charged with that. And what that means sort of in the real world, but what we all just casually refer to as something like the 2-week rule, tent can go up, you got to have permission, fire marshal, inspection, et cetera, but there's a hard 2-week cap on that. That's still in effect. And so that's clarified a little bit in this language. I would not describe that as a change. I would offer it simply as, clarifying intent here. The final piece, as Councilwoman Rogers brought up earlier, the permitted outdoor dining, because it's outdoor dining, we included that lighting recommendation in there that, because the outdoor dining has to cap at 11, then the lights could be on for the extra hour. So that's a little longer than I intended to go on. I apologize, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
So any questions before we discuss those?
I have a couple of questions just for clarification. Well, I have questions about the idea of the definition of adjoining property and what are the guidelines for that. So if I own a, dry cleaning business next to a restaurant, can they put tables then on my property? And in doing so, what are the guidelines? Can we take down a fence? Can we clear? What are the parameters of using a private adjoining property? Clearly in a right of way, there's nothing there. But when we talked about neighboring or adjoining properties, that brings to me a whole list of maybes.
Yeah, all good questions. So in general, whether somebody who's applying for an outdoor dining permit, whether they're proposing to use their property or some portion of their neighbor's property, all site plan regulations still apply. So if, for example, you're required to have a certain number of parking spaces or to have planters in a certain spot because they differentiate the parking and, the sidewalk and it's a safety feature. If there are landscape plantings that are involved, all of those things must remain exactly as they were before. If you're required, again, to have a piece of split rail in there to differentiate and, separate foot traffic from vehicle traffic or something, if that's on your site plan as it was approved or is a requirement of site plan, you're not allowed to adjust any of those things because you now want to come in and use space on your property or
what
your
about
neighbor's
additional
property.
Use then? If your site plan approves a certain amount of uses and now you're adding a dining use?
This is precisely the question that Councilman Lease has proposed. And I think this is an interpretation question and gets very much to the heart of what you all need to decide. So for example, and we see this in Amagansett, right? So if you have a restaurant that is recognized as a restaurant, it's in a commercial business zone and the property next door to it is a commercial business zone, but it's a dry retail use and they have a nice grassy area next to it, can the restaurant with permission of the retail use next door apply to put some tables next door? I would argue that based on the way the law is currently written, they can apply. That doesn't mean planning department has to approve, but they can apply. But we would really like guidance from you all on what you see as the intent of the law as you consider it.
So when I said that, when 255 came to us in maybe March or April, I thought it was a sidestepping of traditional zoning in which it might be a change of use on a neighboring property owner. Now they have allowances to be a restaurant almost, or not of a restaurant where you're necessarily cooking it, but where people are eating on it. And I thought that was a slippery slope, honestly. I know it might have been happening, with handshake deals, between neighbors, but I need to be convinced more on that. then to that, that's the right thing to do as far as zoning on there. It allows anyone that might just have a property and might sell retail now to be able to have a portion of their property that has a restaurant operation on it, or even a takeout. So that was my same concern when 255 came up a while back, and still is there now.
I wouldn't think that it would allow for that particular property to have that use. And I think that's an important distinction.
There's no vested rights. Yes.
Exactly. There's no vesting of any rights because they hosted some tables for dining, whether it be takeout or restaurant. That would be the one thing. And as you said, key elements of site plan can't be, changed as part of this. That would trigger site plan approval. So, I think there's some built-in safeguards, and the appropriateness, if it's going to be reviewed by the planning department, those kind of elements that we would look for in good planning would, I think, be part of that process. So I don't have any, significant concerns as long as, that is all made quite clear that there's no vesting of any rights in the neighboring property by virtue of the fact that they hosted their neighbor, if you will.
So, and this would be an administrative permit, good for a year. So it's calendar year. So, if we could try it, and if it doesn't work out, right, we could do it on a case-by-case basis. If somebody's not a good neighbor and, we PD, code enforcement, fire marshal gets called there, there's an issue with litter, they're not, cleaning up after themselves. Kind of like with special event permits, we keep track of, who we give permits to. And if they're not good actors, well, they get a good hard look the following year and they may not get that permit. So, that is one way in. We could try it. And then if it, and obviously on a case-by-case basis, we also talked about, we had a meeting internally about this on Thursday. This isn't just, it's the administrative permit application goes to the planning department, you do the vetting, but we also have to bring in our other partners, right? We're bringing in code enforcement. So Kevin Cooper and his team is going to look at it. Buzzy Brown in the fire marshal's office and his team's going to look at it. There'll be a call to PD, Chief Sarlo and his group, and the building department, and Glennon. And so I guess where the question came up though is, in cases where it's a right of way and it's town property, we want the town board to weigh in. And how do we do that? Is that something where, like with the special events committee, you have 2 council people assigned to that and they have the ability to do that? Does it have to be brought to the entire town board? Does it have to be by resolution? So, those are things to all figure out. And the reality is though, that it's, we're 6 months into the year and we're, by the time this gets heard and adopted, we're, smack in the heat of the season. And, how does that, the timing isn't ideal.
Well, so I'm not trying to get too far off track. I personally think one of the things we have to do right now is go to the public, meaning I brought the Jeremy and I discussed, I think that with board approval, if they'd like, I would like to send the planning department out to the Chamber of Commerce or to Montauk for 4 hours someday in the upcoming week to week and a half to work with individuals through their applications. Everyone's working right now, but at least if we take down the hour and a half it might take them to get to town hall from Montauk, knowing the majority of the takeouts are in Montauk, I think that would be something that would be good upon us to do if we can find a partner or at a location in Montauk. And I just say the chamber because I know they have that. And I think that would be welcomed. That's an initiative aspect. That's an outreach. Right. I think one of the toughest things we always have to do is how do we outreach to the public? That might be a good way to do it. Going back just to chapter 200, if you don't mind also. Chapter 200 initially was only for map 174, which is what the definition of downtown Montauk was. So through COVID now, we figured out that a lot of people like being outside. But there's also takeout retail in other hamlets, not just downtown Montauk. So Chapter 200 is antiquated because you only allowed it in one portion of the township, not the whole township. So I think we should be looking at it all. So take out the good parts, but then wrap it in the 255. Sorry to sidestep the other thing, but I think you're right, Kathy. However, we can make it more streamlined and easier, I approach it. But one of the ways I think is trying to get your staff ready to go out to Montauk, like we've discussed.
So I want to go back to the using other people's private property for expansion of or putting tables out. I'm concerned about insurance on that one to make sure that has to be part of it, because if you've got to make sure that that owner is going to be indemnified as well. Otherwise, I think it falls back on the town board for creating and the town for creating the legislation that would allow it to happen. So I think that has to be part of the permit, that not only if they use the town's right of ways that we're indemnified, but that owner also has to understand that he's going to or she is going to need to indemnify.
And that's like where it works with special events. So if I'm going to have a party at Kate's house and I put the application in, the homeowner has to sign the affidavit giving permission. So I think you would have the proper, if you're using the neighbor's private property, that neighbor would have to sign an affidavit. And you're right, the certificate of insurance would have to indemnify the town and the neighbor, or however, you know.
I mean, I don't know how many of those we would get, but I mean, that's a lot more to put onto the planning department and to have to make sure all of these things are gathered together before anything happens. So I just am, I'm concerned about the number of employees that we need to start to look at this.
And we're talking about neighboring properties only in commercial zones, correct?
Well, that's subject to conversation, right? So I think broadly the board is being asked to provide guidance on, where do you want to, forgive the turn of phrase, but where do you want to draw the lines? Because right now the code is ambiguous.
I personally don't think, the siting on an adjacent residential property is appropriate.
Yeah,
I think it has to stay within
Just rule
the
that
same.
out.
Yeah.
Right up
So
front.
that impacts any pre-existing non-conforming in residential neighborhoods, they're out.
So the question becomes, if you had two limited business overlay properties next door to each other, which are technically zoned residential, as you all know, and one of them has the ability to operate as either a restaurant or a takeout and wanted to use some of their neighbors' LBO property, I think you all are being asked to offer.
That's a business use. It's not a residential use, though. So, I mean, I think I certainly would rule it out on any strictly residential with no overlay.
I mean, if getting back to LBO, bringing that in, I mean, limited business overlay is a residential. So it really contradicts the code if we say residential cannot take advantage of this program. I think LBO is residential and therefore it cannot take advantage.
Well, I think the key word there is limited. It's limited business. And if you're going to
But if you're a
allow
restaurant,
additional,
you're already
if
not.
you're going to allow additional use on a limited business next door, that maybe that's not a good idea.
So, yeah, I would, and the business committee did not want the limited business overlay. They thought it was contradictory as well and would create problems.
So I will offer you, I'm sorry, Kathy.
Well, I was just going to say in the code that we adopted for restaurants for outdoor dining, we had 100% could take advantage in central business, waterfront, recreational overlay, resort, commercial, industrial, and commercial service. But the transfer from indoors to outdoors was only 75% for neighborhood business and limited business overlay. So I think at the time we took that into consideration. And for takeout, that would mean instead of putting all 16 seats outside, you're only putting 12 seats outside, right?
If you were hoping to use a neighboring property.
Right.
So I want to go back to the word pilot. This is a pilot right now. Just the same thing we did in maybe 18 it was, in chapter 200, sorry, I think one of the reasons people didn't use it is because they had to bring their tables and their umbrellas in. One of the last things I want to see here, and I think, I'll say it to you, is what happened in New York City, where in the right of way or parking spots, there are these fixed structures. A fixed structure is not allowed. Anything over 6 by 6 is a building permit that would trigger site plan. And we're not going to allow for that, but with an umbrella or a picnic table staying there potentially. The timing of this right now is that if we hear all this today, we notice it all today, we're hearing it on July 7th right now, which is a lot to go on to me to make changes. So I would be more appropriately to add these minor caveats into it, take the scalpel to it, and then adjust it if we need to at the end of the season if we saw things that didn't work or such right now. I think it puts a big pressure on businesses to try to pivot as we get towards the height of the season right now. This is enough of a pivot where, we heard from the public. This is why we're having this discussion today, but adding too much more to it, I think it's inappropriate.
Any other comments? Questions?
So I'm
So
not sure.
I guess I'm not clear then
Yeah, I'm
where
not
you're,
clear
where
either.
you're
Sure.
netting out.
Yeah.
So I'll go straight down it, straight with it. Okay, I would like to rescind chapter 200.
Mhm.
I would do string lighting.
Well, let's take this one at a time.
Sure.
Does the board wish to rescind chapter 200?
Yes.
Yes.
I would also amend chapter 255 to outdoor dining to add takeout and allow for permits on town right away as through administrative permit.
Okay, so not neighbors' private property.
I wouldn't allow it on neighbor. Personally, I'm not allowing it. I wouldn't do it
Yeah, I
on
wouldn't
neighbors.
do it either.
neighbor-
Okay,
neighbors'
so
private property.
now we're allowing it on the town right away. So planning gets a look at it, our enforcement agencies and building and get a chance to take a look at it. How do we bring the town board in? Because they don't have the ability, or I don't think they should have the ability to grant, the town right of way.
There's two ways of
without-
handling it. It's
without
either the
us.
town board votes to create a process for it to go completely administratively, or we have our departments, review and recommend, and the town board acts on each one individually. I think those are our only two choices, right?
I would-
Somebody else has a third.
Well, we could do it the way we do it with special events and,
That's the town board authorizing.
right, two
a
people,
administrative-
two council people
an
to be able to
administrative
be the point
process.
people,
So that the entire board doesn't have to act.
right? Because of the timing
I think
is,
it's kind of bifurcated. You take one path to the other.
Yeah, I think unlike special events, it's not going to be a weekly list, people are it's going to be basically at the beginning of the season or the beginning of the legislation. And you're going to have applicants and then
We're going to get a lot in 2 weeks, and
that's going to set the season.
Right.
Yeah. And then next year, hopefully we're in front of this, then we'll be
Right.
prior to the season. I think the special events committee is a lot of the individuals and their departments are a lot of the people that are going to be routed on this anyway, right now. I would think that it's special events, a liaison from the special events, a town board member, maybe the liaison from the hamlet that sees it, or in a different factor, we just dedicate another town board member, which if you want to, I can do it.
Does the board agree then to create an administrative process that does not require a town board vote on each individual?
Yes.
Yes.
I think that's appropriate. It speeds up the process a bit for the folks out there too.
Absolutely.
So, and we need to be clear, we're not talking about the state right of way. We're not talking about
County.
what's going on properties in Montauk or in Amagansett, or perhaps I don't know if there are any in Waynescott. We cannot give them that right of way.
right. But I mean, from what I understand though, like when there's parades or anything that's going to happen, in Montauk down 27, the state has always, my understanding has always said, well, if the town is good with it, we're good with it. I mean, or do we want to do?
Well, that's a special event process, but
Right.
but in terms of my understanding of how the state administers the state right of way is it's a rather lengthy process if they actually go into a lease agreement with the property owner, and there are all sorts of requirements that are included in that. During COVID, they suspended those requirements and streamlined it considerably. I don't know what the status is currently of the state process, whether they have continued with that COVID policy or whether they've gone back to their previous process, which is pretty lengthy. You're not going to get that done in one season.
Right. We should probably though do outreach to the state to find out
Yeah, but it's the state DOT that we need to
where
contact
they are
about that
on
and
this.
find out what the current status is of the state right-of-way
But,
usage.
but I just want to make sure that what we're talking about today is not included in the state right of way.
But it's a good point, Sylvia, that business owners need to understand that we don't have the authority
Right.
to
We say public,
authorize the state.
public right of ways. So the potential is there if they were to get permission from the state or the county to include it in their application for review. But we also say that, if you're using the town's right of way, you have to get us an indemnification and the insurance. And that's it's almost akin to a private property owner then. We don't have the authority. You have to show us something from them. And I understand what you're saying about private property owners. It makes sense to me too, not to go there right now with this, but it's like any other private. I mean, we don't have any authority over the state or the county.
So how
Unless
would
they
we
do-
know if a restaurant got permission to use the state right of
To
way?
show us proof of that. They'd need
We would
something
have
from
to
us.
ask for proof
They'd
before.
have to have that before we would consider issuing any kind of permit
Okay.
for that. Yeah.
I would argue the application isn't complete until they can provide that.
Okay, good.
Prove that.
All right.
And it may be the case that maybe the state will, as they did, I think during COVID, maybe some places they'll grant a blanket approval and let us know that, but we need to have something that's, clear that the state grant and what the terms are. They have to meet the terms.
Yeah.
I would assume they would also require an insurance of some sort, an indemnification, just as we do.
And I'll just give you an example of this exact circumstance on the restaurant approval that you all adopted earlier in the year. We have at least one restaurant that's right on Main Street on 27 in Montauk. And as you all know, that right away there is enormous and goes right up to the front of the buildings. And we actually had to reject an application by one of the restaurants that's right on the main drag there on the north side of the street because they were asking if they could put tables in front of their building. And we said, go talk to the state and then we'll be happy to take it from there.
Okay.
Anything else on this?
I'm happy to work with David and be part of this administrative, having done the special events for 8+ years.
I don't think it's going to take too much time. I would like to see potentially if we can notice this public hearing is that in the next 2 weeks that we would take applications from applicants, but they won't be approved until the legislation is potentially approved on the 7th if we did so.
We have legislation that's approved already, so we
Right,
can
but this is for
approve.
takeouts.
Yeah.
This is for takeouts. And string lighting too.
Okay, for the string lighting,
Yeah.
correct. For the takeout, I think, I don't know how many applications you're going to get for takeout because they're already allowed 16 seats. They're not going to be allowed any more seats than 16 seats. They just can't put them in right of ways or in parking places.
Right.
So-
how much indoor seating are there in the takeout places that they could move outside?
They can move them at will according to the legislation. So if they want 2 inside and 14 outside, they can do that. If they want all 16 outside, they can do that. They don't have to come to planning.
Right.
They're at will right this moment to be able to do that.
If it's on their
If
property.
it's on their property.
If it's on their property, it's when it's off of their property that they,
Well, I think that's where the issue was
Yes.
on Wednesday when our enforcement agencies went out to Montauk.
So my request in response to Councilmember Lisa's suggestion about, how quickly can we get, people beginning to move through this process to eliminate further delay. My only request to you all would be, if you haven't already, and maybe I missed it, give some guidance about how you want to handle that private property question, because I'm happy to receive applications that either are for or not the right of ways. That it seems like there's consensus amongst you all about that. I didn't get a clean read on where you're landing on the private property issue. I don't want to waste somebody's time going through, an application process if we feel like we're probably headed towards private property not being an option here.
So we did this, through an executive order under emergency declaration during COVID to allow certain businesses that couldn't operate indoors to use the neighboring property outdoors. So things went, like exercise studios, for instance. So we made some concessions and through that executive order eliminated the zoning requirement, or suspended it rather. We didn't really have any real issues with that, but this is a little different now. And I think I'm somewhat conflicted about that particular issue of using an adjacent property. I mean, there may be some properties where that's appropriate, and there may be others that are not.
And maybe if it's a property is adjacent to a restaurant, two restaurants together, if somebody can move some of their tables over, but it's very limited where I think it doesn't require a real deep dive into see what could be problematic.
Yeah, I mean, if the middle ground is, I can't see allowing it to happen on a residential property that's being used as a residence.
No.
Yeah,
It would have to be within the same zone.
Yeah. Or some type of commercial overlay on it. So it being used.
CB.
See, without knowing how many properties that is, it's hard to, you know what I mean?
That's why it's good, I think, the plan to
So-
take care of this right away and take Art to look at that.
And then this fall and winter, if
Yeah.
we need to clean it up, we could take another harder pass at that to try to get our arms around how many properties we think that would be, how many establishments we think that would be.
So let me ask a question. I'm going to go back to Takeout again. If the Takeout has room on their property and they still come in to say, no, I want to be on your right of way too. I want 4 tables on my property, even though I could have 16 or 16 seats, I should say, not tables. Are we saying that if you have the ability, you must stay on your property, or can you then ask, because, I really want to be on the right of way because I'm seeing more if I'm on the right of way?
I would be open to it because part of it, I have a lot of friends that still won't eat inside. They'll only eat outside.
No,
And but I know, but what I'm getting to is that, it's nice to have space between tables. And if the reason that they're asking to use the right of way
Good point.
on as well as their own property is to space tables out, I'm all for it.
Okay.
I'd be okay with it too. I think
Okay,
there's a if it's done in a permitted way that we have a look at it. It actually is sort of invigorized a little bit, the downtown areas. I really haven't seen it being abused. I see string lights being abused more than anything else.
Okay.
To be honest. But have a couple of picnic tables out there to have some lunch. I do it all the time and I quite enjoy it. So I don't mind that if they're maybe in the front instead of the back of the
Okay.
building.
I just wanted,
Yeah, that's a good thought.
Anything else? Do you have what
Anything
you
else you
need?
need from us,
did we
Jeremy?
discuss the limited business overlay? Did we come to a conclusion?
Well, I don't know. Did you?
I felt like using the word limited limits it
I think we felt it.
to not be able to do it.
Okay.
Jerry?
Yeah.
Keep in mind, though, they are both prohibited uses, restaurant, food store.
In LBO.
They're both,
Yeah. So if you had a restaurant next to an LBO and it's CB next to LBO, then
I'm sorry, I didn't know if he said prohibited or permitted.
they're prohibited in LBOs
So-
currently.
Yeah.
There's your guidance, I think, right there.
Well, the guidance, yes, but let's point out that the reality, when you pull into 300 Panago over there, on the left-hand side for Goldberg's and whatnot, that's central business. On the right-hand side, that's the beginning of a limited business overlay that extends from there along the highway frontage down to Springs Close Highway. So every single one of those businesses through there, some of which are restaurants and some of which are takeout, are, perfect examples.
Non-conforming uses.
Right. On ultimately a residentially zoned lot that has a
Allow them to
limited, yeah.
You allow them to have their outdoor seating, right?
Mhm.
But not on the neighbor's property.
Yeah.
Is that the consensus of the board?
Yeah, because then that neighbor, if it's a restaurant, they'll already have their own seating outside. So now we're really creating.
What restaurant wants to help their competitor?
And if you can bring back O'Malley's,
They're both on.
Yeah. Not a miracle worker.
Instant.
So I would just ask John, we have we have a limited window for getting any major tweaks in today so that it could still be noticed for the 7th. Do you and I know what we need to know in order to adjust this?
Probably good. It's coming.
I think we just have, I have to look at the adjoining properties part here. I mean, it seems like they want to be okay with letting them have outside dining. It's just use of adjoining properties. So we'll have to see where I can fit that in. Okay.
I heard a yes. I don't know if everybody else heard a yes.
Jeremy, would you be okay if the board requested for an outreach to Montauk Pond, some of your staff members in the next couple of weeks?
Yeah. Look,
Screen applications in that way?
absolutely. I mean, this actually came up on the call.
It came up in our meeting, yeah.
So we had our business committee meeting this morning, and the idea, Jen folks from the chamber said she'd like to book the library, and we said yeah. So we'll double check the back end of it. My crew would be more than happy to spend 3-4 hours out there. We'll make a day of it if that's what's required. I think it just creates an economy.
I'd like to go along.
Yeah.
Make a day of it.
All right. John, do you need me, or we'll catch up later? Or?
Yeah, I'll get the amended version to Carol. I mean, we have an abstract. I think we're probably have to tweak the notice a bit to make sure we're going to clarify the fact that you can't have expansion onto adjoining properties for restaurants and.
John, can you just speak into your
Yeah.
mic so we
Let
can?
me know, yeah.
All right, so the notice will have to be amended somewhat before Carol publishes it, but we have a little bit of time to do that. But the intent is that there'll be no outdoor dining permitted on neighboring properties. If your business is in a neighborhood, in an LBO, is that okay? Okay,
Hey,
we can make that
or
adjustment.
the business that you would like to cite the seating is in LPO.
Okay, so even if you're conforming, you're not allowed to go in. Okay, makes sense.
For the takeout. So let me make sure I understand. What I think is approved under the legislation as it currently stands for restaurants is they can come in and apply to use a commercial property next door. And I think we're still okay with that. I just wanted to make sure that we're not overgeneralizing. And
Right, well, we're not doing this at all for outdoor seating.
correct.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
I mean, you
We're
put it
not
on
doing
your
it
own
all for-
property or in a town right away if we grant permission.
You're talking limited business overlay? No.
I'm talking about any outdoor
Okay,
seating
okay.
that's not for a restaurant. We basically are not
Right,
including private properties or
Correct.
in this mix right now. You can
Correct.
put it on your own property or you can expand it into the public right away that we have control over.
correct,
That's the extent of it for now.
correct.
My
Okay.
understanding.
Okay, good.
For the takeout and the deli folks, yes.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay,
right. But
yep.
for dining, I understand what they want for the
And
restaurant.
for
so we'll make that-
restaurants, are we taking limited business overlay out?
I'd rather leave it into the end of the season right now. I think it just, there's too much ambiguity, and we can try to attack that in the fall and see how it worked out. Then we can pull it from there. That's my preference right now. I think that's just too much of a major change at the last week in June right now. That's how I look at it.
I would agree.
So we're allowing restaurants, not take up in limited business overlay districts to use adjacent property.
No.
Okay.
Outdoor.
That they can use their outdoor space up to 100%.
Yeah, okay, I'm good with that. I just wanted to be clear.
Okay.
Are you clear?
I'm clear. More importantly, is John
Yes,
clear?
John
Yeah,
clear.
you're right.
So no restaurant, in the restaurants or takeout in limited business overlay districts are not able to use
You just
adjacent.
used 2 double negatives, so I'm
I'm
sorry, I'm confused what your point is.
So we're just taking limited business overlay out of the ones that can transfer
Yes,
to outside. Is that what we're
to
saying?
adjacent property.
No.
No,
Adjacent property, that's what, that's what I thought we had, but then
Yeah,
we were
that's-
saying no LBO. I'm not sure what the no LBO
No,
referred
we're not
to.
changing the restaurants at all.
Right.
Okay,
they
so they still get 75%. Okay,
Correct.
okay, that's fine. Okay, got it.
While I'm ahead.
Thanks.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
We'll make some notes.
Thank
while
you.
you're remembering.
So I'm clear, John, what do you have then for takeout and delis as far as LBO?
Okay.
It's a no-go?
On the neighboring
No.
properties.
No, we don't.
One,
We don't have any restrictions based on the zoning district. We say if you have a legal takeout restaurant, and we can't even say by way of CO because they have discussions with Ann Glenn, and a lot of these places are not CO'd for that use. It's a relatively new category, but she can make a determination that they are, an existing approved takeout establishment, then they can have seating in or out up to 16 on their own property and can come onto adjoining public right away, only with our permission and the insurance. And that's
got
it.
it.
Nothing else. So,
Okay.
okay.
That's it.
All right.
All right. That
Very
works.
good.
Cool.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Would it be
John.
easier, John, if we did these resolutions after exec to give you time to fix the notice?
That would be great if you could, sure. Or even in the beginning of exec if you want.
Back
Exec to
into
do
session
that.
after exec, so that gives John the times, because, short on time, short on great. Yeah. The boss used to say.
Okay.
No.
All right, well,
All right.
moving on now, personal wireless service facilities, town code amendment, and Eric Shantz is here.
We also have Anthony L. in the waiting room on Zoom.
Yep, he is from Cityscape, who's the town's wireless consultants. They're available. Yep, they're available for any questions that the board may have. So we've kind of gone through some of the individual elements of this at other times, in front of the board at work sessions. This is intended to be essentially a complete overhaul of the code for a number of reasons that I'm going to get into, but basically to make our code modern. One of the biggest things that you'll see if you look at our wireless code and our wireless master plan is that they're over 20 years old. So if you wouldn't mind, if we could just go to the next slide. So there's really 3 main categories that we're looking at here. First is complying with federal regulations. There's a number of FCC regulations that have been around for over 10 years that really limit what local municipalities can do and how they can review wireless applications of different types. Again, the last code update was in 2001. I don't need to tell everybody that regulations have changed, technology has changed, and community needs and community opinions have changed. The town board commissioned the poll of the community that Cityscape conducted. And from that poll, we can see that attitudes have changed a lot since 1998 when the wireless master plan was first crafted. Also, one thing we really need to do is consolidate the code sections to make it easier for the public and for applicants to follow. The code is currently spread throughout numerous areas of the zoning chapter, which will be the next slide I'll show you in a second. We also want to eliminate difficulties implementing the code and enforcing the standards that we feel are important, whether they be fall zone, design, appearance, location, all of those things. We also want to remove ambiguous definitions that are in the code. There's some definitions that contradict one another. That has to go. And we also want to clarify the review procedure and also streamline it with what the town can and can't do, what they're limited by under federal regulations. So if you don't mind, if you just go to the 3rd slide. Thankfully, you do not need to memorize all of these code sections. This is every location in the town code right now that relates to wireless service. This is in numerical order. They're not all in the same section of the code. There's 25 individual different sections that relate. Some of them are redundant. Some of them are contradictory. We've ran into those problems implementing the code, but as you can see, this leaves a lot of room for improvement. So as I said before, and if we skip to the next slide, Thank you. One of the key goals here is going to be to consolidate things. We really can't consolidate everything into one code section. That's a discussion we had in our internal groups. But really, we're going to put all the code stuff in two sections. One is the definitions. It makes sense that when somebody reads the code and they're looking for a particular term, they go to that section of the code, the definition section, which is 255-120. So we want to update those definitions, but keep definitions related to wireless in that section of the code because it makes the most sense. But then we really want to consolidate nearly all of those 25 code sections you saw in the last slide into one section of the town code. And what that will do, that will provide anyone reading it in one location, the purpose of the regulations, what approvals are required, whether it be the building department, the planning board, et cetera, what facilities are exempted, what types of wireless facilities are prohibited, what our tiering process is. We grade applications in terms of their potential adverse impacts from tier 1 to tier 3. We want to clarify what items are required with an application, clarify the timelines. Most of them are federally mandated. Another thing that I'll get into in a second in a specific slide is avoidance areas and opportunity sites, which is generally speaking, where do we want to see wireless facilities? Where do we not want to see them? Where do we want to prohibit them? We also want to consolidate the general standards. And then what we're also doing, or what Cityscape has done here with us, with the planning department in crafting this, is come up with general standards that apply to all wireless facilities, but then also more specific ones that are based on tiers. Obviously, a tier 1, which is generally a utility pole mounted facility, you're going to need different information from an applicant than if they're proposing a 200-foot tall cell tower. So we are looking to streamline that process. And if you don't mind, just advancing. So just quickly, so there's really two main areas there. There's the updating the definitions and then putting everything into that big code section. I'll get to that in a second. Definitions. And I should have probably begun this conversation with saying that we did supply to you what is basically a document that is an abbreviation of all these code changes. Shouldn't say an abbreviation, it's a complete list. And then it also strikes out what we're changing. It's about 27 pages. Eventually, we'll need to formulate this into, standard resolution format. That's something that we'll work on based on the resolution of these the issues brought up here. So if you look at this slide, these are basically 5 of the most important definitions that we'd add to the town code. Base station is a term that is used in the wireless industry. It's important. It differentiates sites other than towers. So for example, rooftops of buildings, we have a number of facilities like that throughout the town. We're also adding the term eligible facilities request. That's a very important term under the FCC. It requires expediting of applications. And basically, if somebody can meet that definition, the town is responsible to review their application within 60 days. Another thing we'll get to, but that's a key term. Also eligible support structure is an FCC-based term. Small wireless facility, we've been through this before, that are, those are basically utility pole mounted facilities, but that sort of begs an obvious question. What's a utility pole? Is it 100 feet tall? Is it 30 feet tall? Cityscape has recommended that we set basically a guideline that a utility pole mounted facility cannot exceed 50 feet. There's a little bit of leeway in there if they want to modify it, but generally speaking, that's the recommendation. There's also
Is that already in the FCC? Don't they already state that?
Yes. Yeah. And
so we want the match. Okay, I got you. I apologize. Thank you.
Also in there is just a volume that the equipment can take up on a utility pole. So you don't have, a utility pole that might look like this post here and then a gigantic, yeah, exactly. So, and then also substantial change is an important term that triggers certain different applications. But I just wanted to briefly go through those 5 definitions that were added because they're the most important. There's about 24 that are added to the code, but these are really the most pertinent to this conversation. So thank you. So just as a quick reminder, and this is the last time I spoke to you about wireless, we were specifically talking about tiering. We're not proposing really to change anything significantly from what our current code is. Again, tier 1, the least intensive or utility pole mounted small cell. Tier 2 are generally speaking co-locations. You can see in that picture, that's the iconic Montauk Tower that has all of the major carriers on it. That would be tier 2, basically hoping to get equipment where we already have it. And then tier 3, obviously the most impactful are what we'd call macro cell sites, tall towers. This is in fact a picture of the tower that is right outside of this building right here. So if we move along, just continuing about the tiers, and this is something I mentioned before, we've now added a subsection of the code that has general requirements for all wireless facilities, but then addresses the specific timelines and the specific requirements that we need based on, the unique nature of those applications. So now you'll see on this slide, the FCC technically mandates that we deem complete and approve any tier 1 or tier 2 application as those would meet these definitions within 60 days. That's from the time of getting it to currently they all are required, well, except for tier 1, which we don't get a ton of, but for the most part, most of the applications have to go in front of the planning board. The planning board can elect to waive a public hearing requirement. They don't have to, they usually do for minor applications. But basically, if you think about it, we have 60 days as a town from the time an applicant submits something. We have been sending these to Cityscape. We're required to put them in front of the planning board to get, have a meeting date. That all takes time. This is 60 days to approve everything, not just a planning board approval, also a building permit and close out the project. Obviously, under the current framework we have for review, a lot of those very, very minor applications can't make that time frame, which if they are minor, there really is no reason to not comply. Well, there's a lot of reasons to comply with the law, but there's no reason not to in this case. So the other thing to mention, though, is tier 3, which again are very tall, very conspicuous structures. Technically, the town has 150 days to review those. Now, other things do come into play, whether they be Article 78s and things of that sort. But it is important to keep in mind here that the federal government does set a rigid time frame for review of all applications. So we want to honor that and have a code that empowers us to have standards that make sense so that we can focus on the things that are important in the time that is mandated to review it. So if we could just skip along. So just another key thing here, just sticking with tier 3s, because again, they are the most, the largest, the most obvious representatives of wireless facilities in the town. This is also the result of Cityscape's recommendations and some of our internal conversations. We're going to mandate that a pre-application conference be held with the planning department. A lot of that is something that in the future, when we do get an updated wireless master plan, we are going to focus on using the coverage maps, finding locations where we need new facilities, trying to identify within that general area, within that coverage gap, what's an appropriate site, what's an ideal site, which one would we like to see over the other. That's part of the actually SECRA mandated process of identifying alternatives. And we would do that during a pre-application conference with the carriers, because they're looking to remedy their coverage gaps. They're unique applicants in that they're usually not married to one property. They're looking to, meet their customers' needs in an area. So we have an opportunity there to discuss other locations if, the one that a individual carrier might be proposing is really not an appropriate site. So other than that, there's new specific standards that are in here. They mirror a lot of our existing special permit standards. Another thing that's in here is that we are now encouraging in this code co-locations. Our existing code discouraged them. The idea, I think, being essentially just that you didn't want, something that looks like what's outside here or in this slide, where you have a proliferation of equipment on one tower. I do think, though, I should say it seems pretty clear from the community poll that was taken, that this does not seem to be a major community concern at this point. And really, if you have an existing tall mount, such as in this picture, you want to use that opportunity. You don't want to be spreading these facilities out through the town. You don't want to see new tall towers. We want them to co-locate. We want them to use the existing towers that have been in the community for quite a while. So another key thing, and this has come up on a lot of specific applications for new towers, obviously, but are the fall zone requirements. Currently, the town code has what I call a one-time and a two-time fall zone requirement where you can't have any property line within one time. You can have a property line, a horizontal distance equal to one time the height of the tower. So in other words, equal to the height of the tower. You can't have a habitable building or area where people congregate within two times the height of the tower. So in talking with Cityscape and looking at other municipalities, it seems that is excessive. It is not a very common thing, at the very least, to have the two-time fall zone requirement. I think, well, I shouldn't say I think, I know the fear because it's written this way in the wireless master plan, was that you would have birds' nests, ice, things of that sort that might rain down in a high wind event onto a neighboring residence. However, in looking at this, it really seems that that standard is something that is not practically necessary and not really required by many municipalities. Really, what you do need is a property line, or obviously any building not being within equal to the height of the tower, because that's the realistic damage that's going to be done. So part of this, keep in mind, is removing that two times fall zone requirement. And now you can't have a property line or any structure within one time the height of the tower. So just hitting some other things that relate to tier 3, again, with the wireless pole, it did show that the people of the town favor concealed mounts. That's something like being within an existing building, a tower, even faux trees, things of that sort. Though that was not the overriding message you get when you read the poll. The overriding message you get is we need coverage. And we'd like it to be as, visually have the least impact as possible, but we need coverage.
And I believe that was 90% of the respondents.
Yes.
So
it was overwhelming.
Significant. And I'll just also mention that Cityscape, our consultants, had never seen a poll that had such a robust response from a community. So we had a lot of participation.
So then just the other thing here, believe it or not, because we've done this on every application that's a tier 3 for a new large tower, we've required visual assessments. Sometimes people will go to the site with a crane, or they'll do a balloon float and then create photo simulations from different areas. That's actually not in the code right now, but we've always asked for it because, come on, it makes sense. That's the most common sense thing when you're reviewing a tall tower, is how visible is it going to be and from where. So that's something that's proposed to be added as a specific standard to the town code. And if you don't mind, so this is a bit of a rough slide to read. Obviously, this is in that document of code changes that I handed to you. Avoidance areas are the areas within town that we do not want wireless facilities. The names are somewhat of a giveaway here. Opportunity sites are where we would like to see them. This list of avoidance areas is the proposed new code wording, but it really is, in my opinion, more a clarification and, having it read better of the existing regulations. Because if you look at the existing list of avoidance areas, the first thing it mentions is open space, designated open space. And that's what you'll see here is the first bullet point. This is a little bit redundant. I mentioned not having CPF and designated nature preserves. Those both also have other, regulations and requirements that for the most part universally prohibit wireless facilities, but that is in the code. And I think it's important to reiterate that and still have that in there, that designated open space is not an appropriate location for a new macro facility. Other than that, this second bullet point, which you see, and I apologize again that this slide is a little bit difficult to read, that's basically just a rehashing of the list that's in the current list of avoidance areas right now. It's better organized. Another thing we did here is say, because right now it says, a property, if it's within, let's say, a scenic area statewide significance, or let's say a portion of it is within a flood hazard zone. But you have a very, very, very large property. We have one such application. This focuses that wording on within these areas. And again, these areas here are scenic areas of statewide significance, historic districts, areas with historic landmarks, flood hazard areas, agricultural areas. If a new tower is proposed in a site that is within one of those areas or within 500 feet, we'd identify them as an avoidance area. Again, other than saying, right now the code says if that lot is, partially within any of these areas, which doesn't make sense for larger lots. I think that's a better clarification. Opportunity sites here, if you look at this list, this mirrors our tiering, and this is something that we worked with Cityscape pretty intensively to make sure that it worked. We were at first, right now, we don't have opportunity sites ranked. In other words, basically saying to a wireless carrier, start with this. If you can remedy your coverage gap with this, that's what we want to see. And then we'll go down a list of the least ideal way of remedying it, which obviously would be a new, very tall tower. So if you read these, it basically matches our tiering. It says, first, we'd like you to try to remedy your coverage gap with a small cell installation. Then we'd like you to co-locate on a facility, a building that already has equipment. If not, we'd like to see you put it on a building that doesn't have equipment. We'd like to see it on rooftops first, as opposed to on the side of the building. And then we'd like to see new macro sites, first on town-owned properties, then on properties of other municipalities, and then on private property. So this basically directs the applicants, I think, in a constructive way as to what we want to see with new facilities. So this is basically the last slide. Just in summary, what we want to do here is match what the FCC says we have to do, us just like any other local municipality. Consolidate the wireless regulations into basically one section of the code. You saw what that mess was on that one slide. Also better define and provide unique standards for tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, so that when an applicant comes in, they know what the deal is. Here's what we want to see. Here's the information we want. Here's our standards based on the tier that you're in, not have a scavenger hunt through the code. And then the other big part here is the list of avoidance areas and opportunity sites. I would ask that the board, I know that you haven't had this document for too long, look at that list and make sure that you are comfortable with what we're recommending. Again, it's not a big departure from what the existing code is, but we think it makes sense. And obviously this is the time to have that conversation. So really the big thing here, the immediate thing is that for these code changes, what we'll do is we will write this up in the standard format for a resolution. I wanted to have that here for you today, but this is really the first conversation about the comprehensive code changes, but we'll prepare a public hearing resolution for you. In the meantime, anybody from the public who has any questions about this, any comments, can contact the planning department. We'll keep a record of those. We'll hear the public, we'll hear the board's comments, both from that public hearing and from any conversation you have now. And we will amend this as necessary. But basically, I think this is a really important step to modernizing our town code. The big picture thing after this is the wireless master plan update. I spoke with Cityscape about that this morning. We are basically ready that after we have made what I believe are immediately necessary code changes, which is this topic of conversation, we can move pretty quickly onto the wireless master plan update, which obviously is the main goal of the town board. I'm sure along with that, there's going to be some other changes to the code, some tweaks and things. We're going to come up with policies of where we want to see future facilities, how we're going to solve our coverage gap problems. But that's a bigger picture issue that I'm happy to say is very close on the horizon. But I think this is your most important step, is making these changes. And if you wouldn't mind, but basically that's just asking if you have any questions or comments for me.
Any questions or comments for Eric?
No, if you don't mind, I'm going to take my time a little bit more with this.
Yeah,
I divulge into
totally
it, but
get it.
it's an initiative that I'm very appreciative that we're moving forward on right now then too.
Well, it's certainly time to update the
Yeah.
code.
It's been
I think the one slide that Eric showed of the different parts of our code that have been added, I guess over time, it's
Confusing.
it's confusing to say the least, and I think really drives home the point that we need to update the code. The fact that there are federal regulations in place that our code is not consistent with is also obviously another driver, as is the overall effort to improve cellular service and reduce coverage gaps and address capacity issues throughout the town, which we saw during COVID really stretched beyond the breaking point. And, I think having engaged the community in a discussion about what the community wants, it's clear that, they want better coverage. And we, are going to be stepping into the next phase, which Eric alluded to, which is the update of the comprehensive master plan for wireless. So are there any specifics that anybody has identified immediately and or want to take a little more time and digest?
I'll take time to digest. It's a lot of things here. I wanted to ask about, and this may not be pertinent to this particularly, is the engineering standards. I know they changed even while I was on the planning board. Can you tell us if they're changing again and how they're changing?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything immediate, but yeah, that's for the most part what you're asking about. Those relate to wind load standards. I know some years ago there was an updated standard that came into effect, and it was something we had to ask for all the time from applicants because they were using the old standard. I don't think there's Eddie Schnell would know this better than I would. I don't think there's anything. I don't think the issue is that they're going to be changing them soon and it's going to be having a big effect on us. It's really more just us having it codified and keeping track of the application and making sure that they're with the pertinent new wind standards. But the problem they have is that there's the general zone around here is a certain wind rating, but since we're so close to the water, we have a higher wind rating. So.
And climate change is affecting it even more. So, and that brings me to the point of the single fall zone, which I think is appropriate. What isn't appropriate is I want to know how these things are attached so that if, high wind speed, you said, a bird's nest could fall off and hit. So I'm thinking one of these antennas could fall off and hit a home or
Well, again, they have to meet the wind standard ratings to.
I just want to make, that's why I asked about the engineering standards, if they've changed, if we're looking at it through, climate change issues as well. And if we are indemnified, if these things fall off, if they meet all those standards, I'm assuming we are, if we own the tower.
I assume as well, but I will ask that specific question with our team.
Any other questions?
No, I just want to say this is terrific. I know that, we've been working on this for the last 6 or 7 months, and the fact that it's all going to be in the same section, and it'll be easier for applicants, easier for the planning board, easier for, to be able to move forward, because what we know is our community wants connectivity.
Yeah, I'll take this opportunity to thank you, Kathy, and the other committee members and planning staff that work with me and our outside consultants to get to this point. And we look forward to continuing to improve the service.
Before anything else, I just want to let you know, Anthony L. is raising their hand on Zoom, by the way. I thought that they would just chime in, but I just saw a raised hand and I wasn't used to seeing that.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. We'll segue to Anthony then.
This is Anthony Lepore from Cityscape. I just wanted to add a bit about the wind loading issue questions that were raised. So A, the standards are always reviewed and updated periodically. And so what your code will require is that the applicant bring an application that meets whatever the current applicable standards are for your community with given the proximity to the ocean and the higher wind rating that's required. Secondly, they have to provide a structural study that shows that both the tower and the mounts, which is what the antennas are attached to, meet those wind loading standards, which is what gives you some peace of mind vis-a-vis them not flying off in the face of a nor'easter.
Hurricane. Category.
Or a hurricane. Yeah.
Thank you, Anthony. Anything else before we move on? Again, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Anthony, for joining us today for this topic. That brings us up to liaison reports. Kathy, do you have a liaison report for us?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to let the board know that Diane Patrizio and myself continue to meet with R2. They're working on the program for the new senior center. They'll be interviewing and setting up sessions with the different supervisors in the programs, nutrition, transportation, administration. We're hoping at the end of the month to have a Zoom with the town historian and other representatives from the historical societies. So we're pretty excited about the enthusiasm with R2 and how this project is moving forward. I also wanted to bring to folks' attention an ongoing issue with the YMCA Rec Center. As you know, we bonded back in the spring for a new HVAC system and a new roof there. McLean has got the bid specs. I think we're ready to go to bid very soon. We're hoping to do the work after this summer season. But their current system is failing, and last summer it was working better, and they used fans. That's not going to cut it this year, so they need to bring in a temporary solution. And Matt Jedlicka had recommended to bring in a freestanding AC unit that's put in the outside of the building. And what we'll need to do is remove 3 panes of glass for the venting. And the Y has been working with East Hampton Village. They're getting their building permits. I believe that's already been done. And I just wanted to let the board know, since it is our building, that is something that we needed to do, and it's a short term. It's just for the heat of the summer, and then because what is that? Yeah, for the heat of the summer. So we're moving forward with that. And then I was talking to Severo about it because he was involved in the brainstorming on how to solve the problem, and I had requested if he could, at an upcoming work session, give us a capital update on the projects that he's been working on and shepherding, so that we have a good understanding of where things stand. And he said he could probably do that. Needs a couple weeks to pull it together, but we probably want to do it before his baby is due, which is sometime in mid to late August. I also got a request from the Hampton Lifeguard Association, as we all know, that their mission is to waterproof our kids on the South Fork, and that they're a chapter of the United States Lifeguard Association and a 501c3. And the programs that they support include lifeguard training and competitions, the junior lifeguard and competitions, volunteer ocean rescue, the Hurricane Swim Club, and in-school programs. And this request relates to the national competition. And we know that back in August of last year, they ranked 3rd in the country in the competition. So what happens is, that competition takes place roughly around the second week of August. And it typically means Johnny Ryan Jr. and TJ Calabrese rent a U-Haul, put the 19-foot dory boat that's stored at the dory barn in that boat, load in all the other equipment, and drive to Monmouth, New Jersey, because that's where they've got trailers that bring the equipment, for those folks on the East Coast, to wherever the competition's going to be. And it's challenging driving such a big U-Haul, and they think that they've got a better suggestion, and it gets costly. What they want to do is HLA would purchase a boat trailer and donate the boat trailer and the dory boat to the town. And what they're asking of us is to put plates on it, make sure that the trailer's insured. So what they could do is then, rather than rent a U-Haul, they can throw all the boards and any equipment they need in the back of the pickup truck, of the Ocean Rescue pickup truck, and take the trailer, and then the dory boat gets stored on the trailer, all year long. So I reached out to Ricky Talmadge, and apparently it costs nothing to get plates. And he believes that the insurance on the truck would cover the trailer. So really, I don't believe there's any out of pocket for the town. The other part of it is that the HLA would be requesting that they take the Ocean Rescue truck off, twice a year out to Monmouth and then back, take it off the road. They would leave at 4 a.m. They'd be back by 11. So it would only be off the road for a couple hours. There were 3 other lifeguard trucks that would be here. So that's basically the request. And I'm hoping, if I have your support, I will work it out. I have a call into Lisa Valchik just to make sure if it makes more sense for them to donate the trailer or for them to donate the money and we purchase the trailer. I mean, we'll work out the details.
I support the concept.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Okay. That's what I've got for today.
Well, I have a short one also, and I'll put on right onto lifeguards. I want to let everyone know, due to this week being the first week, actually, first of all, happy summer solstice, longest day of the year to everyone. And to my friend Willie Stedman, happy birthday to him. Sorry, I can't get that place in Hawaii. He hasn't even woken up yet. So happy birthday, Willie. We're not going to be having lifeguards during this week at Maidstone Beach and Springs. They'll be on duty starting on Saturday, going full time from there. I also want to let everyone know that we're going to be adding about 30 yards of sand to ditch plains in order to get a second stand in there. Right now, ditch plains is having some erosion issues, but we need to dump sand out there, clean sand too, just to be able to set the stand in it. It's not going to be a full nourishment. It's just for that stand. We did that for the first stand also, even to get it open. I'm going to have a resolution add-on resolution today for emergency dredging of commercial slips in Montauk that have been filling up with sand and are becoming a navigational hazard issue. And lastly, I will continue to bring the board in more into this as we get more information. But we had a first meeting with Marilyn Behan and her family, Assemblyman Thiel, and Legislator Bridget Fleming and myself about the surplus property that the county is surplusing to the town and designing and dedicating a future memorial plaque and such, or to be decided by the family in the honor of her late husband, the state assemblyman, the state senator, Assemblyman John Behan. Just want to let everyone know that's something upcoming.
Yeah, thank you, David. We look forward to proving that.
Yeah. So this is for the business community. Usually we meet on Wednesday. We met this morning before this town board meeting. And as Jeremy said, he had a dry run to some of the aspects that we heard earlier. Robert Ross was on. He gave us the numbers for COVID. Southampton Hospital has 7. None are in ICU. Stony Brook has 41, and they have 2 in ICU, 1 on event. Eastern Long Island has none. Testing on the 15th and the 17th. Each day on the 15th, it was 34 were tested. 4 people were positive. It's 11.8% positivity. On the 17th, 34 were also tested. There were 3 people that tested positive, so that's 8.8% positivity. Vaccines are still being given on Wednesdays. On the 15th, they gave 38 vaccines. 2 people got boosters and 35 got their second boosters, and the rest were getting their second shots. Nobody got a first shot. The high school site for boosters and for vaccines and testing is now closed. It closed on the 13th and it will be closed. It was mainly for staff that needed it. So they will be closed from now on and through. They'll see if they need to open up in September. And so that was
all on the issues. He did say, sadly, we've had several deaths, one in Southampton and one in Stony Brook from COVID. So reminding the community that it's still out there and is still can be dangerous. So one of the things, you got a letter from the Montauk Chamber talking about the Administrative Bureau. So we, both Ed Michaels and David McMaster were on the call this morning and explaining all the different aspects, how long we've been looking at it, et cetera, and what is actually on the ticket, which was important to them. And David was going to then send the everything that's on the ticket. The litter is on it several times, depending on where the litter is. Open alcohol, dogs on the beach,
Beach fire violation.
Yeah,
It's all public, it's quality of life issues.
it is quality of life issues. There is one that is related to the businesses and to residences. It's having outdoor speakers on after 9 p.m. So there is a concern with the business community, and particularly in the Chamber of Commerce in Montauk, was that would those violations go to the SLA? Because it's a noise violation.
I think they normally do.
And so David said it's really at the discretion of, how many, how often, what happens. But everything else related to noise is still in the, with the police department, the fire marshal, and the code enforcement. So the loudness, so it's only the speakers.
So it's only amplified music after
Amplified
9
music
p.m.,
after 9
regardless of what it,
Right, where it is.
Right, regardless of where it is. So, so we went over that. I think we have a great relationship with the chamber, and with the business committee in general. They were asking some good questions. We then went over all of the issues about the lighting and the and everything that Jeremy talked about today. They were all very appreciative and supported, what was going on with the presentation that we had today. And that's really all that I have as a report.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Oh, well, wait, I should go back. We did bring up David going to, and Jeremy is still here too in the audience, going out to Montauk. And they were all very happy to see that happen. And, again, it was brought up, communication is the key here. And so we want to make sure we communicate well. And this going out to Montauk does not mean that we're not concerned about Amagansett or any other of the hamlets. If they have issues, the planning department is open to, talking to anybody, anytime, making sure that they understand what their CO is all about, their site plans, if they have them, and want to be very helpful in making sure that our businesses stay, well, I would say local, stay local and thrive.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Kate?
Yes, I have a couple of items I'd like to report on. This morning, I had a monthly compliance meeting with the South Fork Wind Farm developer and also the construction team, members of regulatory agencies. The Department of Public Works also attends. They gave an update of where they are in construction right now. They are still working along the right-of-way of the railroad with sheathing and trenching. They are either on time or ahead of schedule on that aspect. They also have started foundation construction at the interconnection substation on Cove Hollow Road. That work is ongoing. It looks like they will be on schedule to begin in October with cable pulling, splicing, the horizontal directional drilling, and the offshore work. Before anything returns to our roadways, there will be another full outreach again to the impacted residents, pre-construction meetings, and also a pre-construction meeting with all the town agencies, just as they did in the beginning of the construction season here. Everything looks to be on time. They're still looking to have the energized dates for both the substation and the wind farm in 2023. There have not been any compliance issues to date from any of the state agencies. Also, the group against garbage did another cleanup. They organized a cleanup for the Springs corridor. When I was on the way to the Juneteenth celebration on Saturday, they already were out in force and cleaning up along the way. And I want to thank them for all their efforts. And they organized quite a big group of folks that turned up for the latest cleanup along the Springs corridor. And I thank them for all the work that they're doing, and everyone who volunteered. They had vests and they were safe, and it's really wonderful to see them out doing this work. I'd also like to let folks know that for the first time, this spring CAC is meeting in person, and also we'll have a Zoom component this evening. If anyone's interested in Springs and attending the Citizens Advisory Committee meeting in person, it's at Ashwell Hall at 6 p.m. And that's pretty much all I have. I just want to thank Peter, thank you, and everyone for all the organizing and the wonderful celebration that was held on Saturday at Lee Hayes Park. It was really, again, inspirational and wonderful to see the community come together. It was a pleasure to have Congresswoman
Stacy
Plassett attend, and her words were certainly inspiring. And hopefully it was recorded. I know there were drones up and cameramen around. So
I think LTV was there filming.
I did see a wonderful piece on it and a video online at Newsday also that I'll send around. That was really lovely. And again, thank you for all your hard work on that. And that's what I have.
Thank you, Kate. Well, today is the first day of summer, as David said, beat me to the punch. Summer solstice today. And we're kicking off what will likely be a busy summer. The weather so far has been really amazing. As Kate said, on Saturday and Sunday, there were celebrations of Juneteenth. I participated and attended those. On Saturday, we started with a walk from the American Legion to the Lieutenant Lee Hayes Youth Park for a formal dedication of the park and also Juneteenth celebration. The walk was called A Walk in the Footsteps of an American Hero. Lieutenant Lee Hayes is a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, and that detachment was instrumental, really, I think, in breaking down race barriers and leading to an integrated military in the United States, which took place in 1948, post World War II. But Lee Hayes was then, he was a bombardier pilot flying over Germany during the war, and yet was denied the position of pilot in the commercial air industry, which was expanding significantly at the time. They certainly needed pilots, but because of his race, he was overlooked for that. He was lifelong, from the age of 8, lived in East Hampton, I think passed at 91 in 2013, if I recall correctly. But that was a pretty memorable march. We were led by the Tuskegee motorcycle club. So we had motorcycles and a color guard, probably 150 or more members of the Hayes family.
Beautiful family, wonderful.
And that's not even half of them. I think there's like 350 of them. Lee Hayes was one of 13 children. Much of that area of town it's called Hayesville, if you will. Queen's Lane is named after his daughter, Queen Davis Parks. So that that family's had quite an impact on the community. So it was a very fitting tribute to Lee. As Kate said, we had the Congresswoman Stacy Plassett, Reverend Dr. Walter S. Thompson from Calvary Baptist Church spoke. We had members of the Tuskegee Club, as well as the National Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Right? We're also there in force. On Sunday, the keynote speaker at Herrick Park was Lewis Brogdon. He's associate professor, director of the Institute of Black Church Studies at Baptist Seminary of Louisville, Kentucky. he had a piece in Guess Words, which I recommend everybody read from this past issue of the East Hampton Star. And we also had our very own Hugh King, town historian, who spoke about Thomas Jefferson Davis, who was a Black native of East Hampton who fought in the Civil War. And then there was words given by Evie Rattray, David Rattray's daughter, about the Plain Sight Project, which is a really important project that basically talks about a growing awareness of the influence and the importance of enslaved Black people within our community, a history that's not well known and undertold for certain. And so that project really is trying to discover as much as we can about that untold history. And so, as Kate said, beautiful weather both days. It was great to be out in the community. Hope everybody had a happy Father's Day on Sunday. And then, Monday here we had town offices were closed for the national holiday, Juneteenth, which was celebrated on Monday as well. So I don't have an update this week on the COVID numbers. We do still offer testing Wednesdays and Fridays from 11 to 5 at 110 Stephen Hand's Path. In addition, we have free test kits that we're giving out here at Town Hall, right out here in the atrium. There's a table set up. We ask that you come by and grab some if you like. They're 2 per person. And that's basically all I have to say, I guess, today.
So do we want to are we going to come back into session? So as we.
So John, we'll have a resolution prepared.
I'll have it ready for you when you come.
So
You want to do all the. do you
let's
wanna
go
do all
ahead
of
and,
them?
well, we could.
We can certainly do 8, I think 8:13 is the one on lighting. That should be fine as is.
So if you like, the board wishes, we can just go into executive session now. Jason,
Questions?
we will need to go back into public session then to do resolution.
Yeah, it's fine. If you want to just contact me, and I'll put it back up, and I'll put executive session up on the broadcast right now.
Excellent. Appreciate that. I'll entertain a motion.
That could be a couple hours, Jason, you realize, right?
Oh, I didn't. No, I did not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll just stop it for now, and then we'll have it pushed back when you tell me to. All right.
Great.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you very
Thank you
much.
very
Jason. I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Motion to go into executive session for personnel, leases and licensing agreements and advice of counsel.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passed and carried. Shall we convene exec at 2:00?
Sounds good.
Okay.
And then we will re-enter public session as soon as we are able to finalize those resolutions.